evening from New York. This is Friday, December 3rd, 704 days until the 2012 presidential election. And tomorrow, Saturday, the Senate will vote on two different versions of extending the Bush tax cuts. Both votes expected to fail to get through an expected GOP filibuster, since they do not extend tax cuts for the very wealthiest Americans. And even those votes will be delayed by one day because of the objection of one anonymous Republican. In our fifth story, the GOP extortion, as well as the White House's seeming capitulation, moves onward. The deal that Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid had reached with Republicans would have included 4 different test votes today on extending the Bush tax cuts, but at least one anonymous Republican senator objected to a request for unanimous consent, catching Reid by surprise. And when Reid went last night to the office of Minority Leader Mitch McConnell to try to salvage the deal, McConnell was nowhere to be found. So according to The Hill, waiting for McConnell's aides to find the Minority Leader, Senator Reid waited in McConnell's reception area and passed the time by eating chocolates. That is what this has come to. Senate Republicans, you'll recall, said there would be no time for unemployment insurance or the START Treaty or the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell or the DREAM Act until taxes and government funding were done. They were unanimous in their threat of a filibuster. Then one anonymous Republican slowed that down even further because he or she can.
I received a letter from all the Republicans yesterday saying we're not going to allow you to do anything legislative until we get the tax cuts resolved and funding the government. Well, Mr. President, we're not getting legislative things done now. Now they're not letting us do the tax cuts and funding the government. So we're going to try to work our way through this.
But tomorrow, Senate Democrats will at least get to go on record. The two votes include an extension of middle-class tax cuts, similar to what just passed the House, as well as Senator Schumer's version to extend tax cuts for every income up to $1 million. And Senate Democrats have not missed their chance to debate the merits of tax cuts for the rich and how those dollars get spent compared to the money that goes to the jobless, from Senator Sherrod Brown and Senator Dianne Feinstein.
That money's going to get spent. So every dollar you put in unemployment generates $1.60 in economic activity, which will create jobs. Conversely, $1 in tax cuts for the wealthy, $1 that goes to a millionaire, that dollar that goes to a tax cut for the wealthy ends up generating about 30-some cents in economic activity, creating significantly fewer jobs.
The recovery for the richest Americans seems well underway. They are able to do well for one reason or another in this economy. But it's the income groups below them that are not, that can't get the loans, that can't meet the payrolls, whose homes are being foreclosed on, who have great difficulty surviving in this most difficult economic marketplace.
And yet the reports keep rolling out, including from the New York Times and the Washington Post, that the White House is fully prepared to accept a 2- or 3-year extension of economically disastrous Bush tax cuts for all income levels. And also that President Obama wants to reach a broader deal that would include an extension of unemployment insurance, possibly a 1-year extension, which could affect up to 7 million unemployed Americans. Meantime, the cohorts of former President George W. Bush, like his former communications director Dan Bartlett, cackling today over the trap they set, when that's their term, with the 10-year Bush tax cuts. Quoting Mr. Bartlett, "We knew that politically, once you get it into law, it becomes almost impossible to remove it. That's not a bad legacy. The fact that we were able to lay the trap does feel pretty good, to tell you the truth." Of course, those who Mr. Bartlett trapped were not the Democrats, but Americans. The new poll, 53% favor the middle-class tax cut only, 67% against extending tax cuts for the wealthy, including the 14% that thinks all Bush tax cuts should expire. Not even a majority of Republicans polled favor extending the Bush tax cuts for the rich. Which brings us to our first guest, the director of the Office of Management and Budget under President Reagan, now New York Times contributor, David Stockman. Great, thanks for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Should any of the Bush tax cuts be extended?
No, they should not be extended. We couldn't afford them in 2001 and 2003 when they were passed. Since then, we've had 2 unfinanced wars. We've had this huge stimulus, $1 trillion. We put all this money into TARP. We have now maxed out our national credit card. We're close to the edge of insolvency in this country, and it's a farce to have a debate about extending tax cuts for the rich especially, but ultimately for anyone. And to hear Bartlett say and chortle that we set a trap is a travesty. That is disgraceful, what that gentleman said. And it is only a measure of how far off base both parties are but especially the Republicans. They had a chance to cut spending for 8 years, and Bush didn't veto a single spending bill. They had a chance to cut entitlements, and what did they do? Nothing. They added Part D drug benefits, as you know, the largest entitlement expansion since the 60s. So what are they talking about when they say no tax cuts? That is just phony baloney.
In passing these cuts and in arguing for their continuation, Ronald Reagan's tax cuts have been invoked repeatedly. Are they being invoked correctly, and are the results of those cuts being invoked correctly?
No, I think totally incorrectly. That was 1981. We had a clean national balance sheet. I remember well going in the first month, we had to raise the debt ceiling, $1 trillion. Here we are 30 years later, it's $14 trillion. Our economy has only grown 3 or 4 times. Our debt has grown 14 times. Now, what happened was we were going to cut taxes and shrink government. When it got to the job of shrinking government, what happened after a couple battles on the House and Senate floor is Republicans shrank from the battlefield. They were unwilling to put their rhetoric into action, and as a result, we got a one-sided policy. And the Republicans became the free lunch party of tax cuts. The Democrats became the party of defending what was there, the spending, the welfare state. We went 30 years of 2 parties competing to see who could give away more money, and as a result, we used up the credit card, and that's where we are today, and it's a very dire circumstance.
So when you hear all this go on, and as you say, Mr. Bartlett's remarks today, which offended us equally, I think, when you hear Ronald Reagan's name invoked as kind of some sort of patron saint of what has been done for the last 10 years and what is being proposed now, how does that make you feel, having worked with the man on these particular issues?
Well, I feel that his legacy is being abused. Ronald Reagan believed in hard money, not money printing like the Fed has been doing for the last 10 or years. He wanted prosperity from hard work, from investment, from entrepreneurial activity. We have only had bubbles and booms that were based on debt and money printing at the Fed. Those are the opposite of what Ronald Reagan believed in the 60s and the 70s, and as he went into the White House. And now you have all of these kind of ersatz supply-siders who basically, I think, are totally distorting what the whole program really was about.
All right, lastly, if you were involved in this administration in an advisory capacity or whatever, what would you be saying to them right now? What do they have to do at all costs?
I did spend a few years in the White House, as you know, and I would take the president behind his desk. I would open the upper left-hand drawer and say, Mr. President, that's where they keep the veto pen. You haven't used it. Get it out, and if they send you a bill that's got tax cuts for the rich in it, veto it. Take a stand and bring some discipline back to this country. If we're going to give tax breaks with Uncle Sam's credit card to the top 2% so they can go to Tiffany's and buy some more jewelry, where are we? We're lost.
And do you think there's anybody that has, in either party right now, the fiscal responsibility and the sense of disaster that is required to do any of these things, or are we headed to that cliff with no chance of putting on the brakes?
Well, I think both parties are racing towards the cliff. You know, it is not change you can believe in when you're going to negotiate a big, sloppy Christmas tree bill that's going to have an extension, not only the tax cuts for the rich and the middle class, but all the credit, all the business tax credits, all of this, and it's just driving us closer to the edge. It is really a sad thing to see happen.
David Stockman, the former budget director for President Reagan, great thanks for your time. Appreciate it.